I would say don't believe everything your brain tells you.
Mm,
It's
okay.
true.
Okay.
You have to
Okay.
check things out. Our brains frequently trick us. What I found out was that our brains create our anger by giving us maps of what's happening. And those maps are often not what's really happening. But remember when there was a point where we believed in Santa Claus
Yeah.
until one day somebody made fun of us for believing in Santa Claus, who maybe was a couple
Yeah.
of years older than us.
Yeah.
And we realized, oh, wait a second, now when I think about it now, how did that guy get around all the houses and how did he get down all the chimneys and take all the presents to all the kids around the
Yeah.
world? I would say if you're particularly around anger, if you're having anger problems and you've tried all kinds of stuff, which most people have, and it hasn't worked, which is true for most people, it's not you. The problem is not you. The problem is that you haven't been exposed to the right information yet.
Very convertible wisdom. We're joined by Dr. Mort Orman, a physician, renowned anger elimination expert with over 40 years of experience. He's here to share the powerful words that shaped his journey from chronic anger to emotional freedom and what it can teach all of us. Welcome to Relatable Wisdom, the podcast where people share timeless ideas. I'm your host, Wisdom Okonkwo, and in every episode we dive into the philosophy, sports, points, and life lessons that shape how we live, think, and grow. No matter where you are in life, this show is here to remind you wisdom is everywhere. It's always relatable most of the times.
Can you tell us your name and what's your favorite quote or philosophy is?
I'm Dr. Mort Orman, and I'm an internal medicine doctor and an anger and stress elimination expert for the last 40 years. And you want to know what one of my favorite quotes? Is that right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. So one of my favorite quotes is "The map is not the territory,"
Mm. The
and
map
that
is not.
I think that says a lot about how our brains function. And why we end up with a lot of emotions that our brain creates by giving us maps that are not quite the territory, that don't quite represent exactly what's happening around us.
Yeah. First of all, before we even go into understanding and having you explain what that really means, because this is not exactly the type of course that you can easily grasp the meaning at face value. When did you first come to the realization of this, that the map is not territory?
Well, I think I realized it in my own personal life where you realize that you thought you understood things, you thought you knew things, turned out to be not accurate, and you kept getting that message as you go through life. You would have various beliefs or philosophies or strategies that seemed good in thought, but then when you tried to actualize them, they didn't really pan out. So I guess most of us get to learn early on that our thoughts and our theories don't always equate with reality. Some
Okay.
more so than others.
Yeah. Earlier on, you told us that your favorite quote is "the map is not the territory." I'm curious, what does that mean? Can you explain to me like I'm five?
Yeah, it's almost like if you're commanding an army and you're going into battle against an enemy, and you have sort of a map of the territory that you're going to be the battleground where you're going to be meeting the enemy, and your map tells you all the key points and topography and things like that. And then when you actually have your soldiers get out onto the battlefield, the map is just a representation. It doesn't give you all the detail about what it's like to have feet on the ground, in that particular location and all the changes and things that occur that you didn't anticipate or the map didn't capture. So a lot of times, commanders of armies are well aware of the fact that whatever maps they're working on, the reality on the ground could be very different when their troops actually get there.
Yeah. So, in other words, if you could rephrase this quote or say it in in other words, what would it sound like?
I would say, don't believe everything your brain tells you.
Mm,
It's
okay.
true.
Okay.
You have to
Okay.
check things out. Our brains frequently trick us, and
Yeah.
we think that we're getting accurate information, and we find out, much to our surprise and sometimes regret, that we had a misunderstanding or we assumed something to be true that wasn't really true, or our brains gave us a picture of what is going on, and the reality was different from what our brains told us was true.
Yeah. Have you, in your personal life, over the course of years, have you had times where it seemed like the map was the territory? And can you share instances of that?
Yeah. Well, for example, when I was in my 20s and 30s, I had a series of failed relationships with women, one after another. Part of it was that I didn't really understand how to control my anger. I didn't really understand anger and how my brain was making me angry. But another part of it was I had these unconscious sort of models of how a man should act in a relationship with a woman. And I don't know where I got them from, but obviously somehow they got implanted into my head. And I would conduct my relationships from those models of how I thought you're supposed to behave in a relationship. And the relationships failed one after another. It wasn't until I finally realized that those those maps of how to succeed in a relationship were all wrong, and they didn't really work with real people and relating to real people. Then I had to really question my whole understanding of relationships. I had to go and get some training, get some insights into what works in relationships and what doesn't, and create a whole new set of maps, which fortunately helped me end those relationship failure problems. And my wife and I just celebrated our 40th wedding anniversary.
Wow.
So the maps I have now work a hell of a lot better than the maps that I had before that I thought were correct. And it turns out they were not success maps; they were failure maps. But I didn't know that at the time.
Wow. Well, this quote you just shared now, could this quote be subject to misinterpretation? If yes, what's the misinterpretation?
I suppose it could. I think people will tend to trivialize the difference between the map and the territory. It's like, okay, it's a small, yeah, true. It's not the actual territory, but it's close enough, or it's good enough, or it's pretty good. And sometimes it is, but a lot of times it's way, way off. Our mental maps are way, way off of how reality is and how reality works. So the gaps can be huge when it looks like they're really insignificant. So I think that's one thing people could do is they just take a very trivial viewpoint of the difference. They might acknowledge, yeah, that's true. I know the map is not the same thing as the territory, but they don't realize how off we can be in our assessments.
Yeah. Well, over the course of years in your life, have there been instances where you've had to like adapt or kind of like reinterpret the quotes to fit the context or the situation you were in?
I've done it multiple times in my lifetime. Multiple times I've had a map of how the world works or how something worked or what I should be doing. And I had to really change it because it wasn't working out for me or something new information.
Can you share two instances of such?
Yeah, well, so I'm a physician. I've been a doctor for 50 years, but I never grew up wanting to be a doctor. I was the opposite. I didn't want to be a doctor. I didn't like anything about the whole idea of being a doctor, but my parents wanted me to be a doctor and they were pushing me to do that. And I did like science. So in school, I was attracted to science. And so when I went to college, I was a chemistry major and I wanted to get the best science courses. So I signed up for pre-med, even though I had no intention at all of becoming a doctor. And then when it was time to choose what I was going to do, I had applied to medical school to make my parents happy and got accepted, but I wasn't going to go. And I went to schedule an appointment with the biochemistry chairman of the department at the college to be a graduate student in the biochemistry school. And when I interviewed with him and he found out that I'd applied to medical school and I got in, he told me I was crazy to not go to medical school. He said, don't you know that you can go to medical school, you don't have to be a doctor. If you want to be a biochemist and do biochemistry research, you'd be better off with an MD degree. And I didn't know that. I thought the only reason my map was the only reason somebody goes to medical school is to be a doctor. And I thought to me, there was no reason to go. He said, no, you'd be much better. You could do biochemistry. If you want to do biochemistry, you're much better off with an MD degree than a PhD degree. I did not know that at all. And in that one conversation that lasted about 20 minutes, when he changed my whole attitude and said, okay, well, he actually said to me, what's the worst that's going to happen? If you go and you give it a try and you don't like it, come back here, I'll give you a position. So it's like, I had no reason not to go. I said, okay, I'll give it a try, see what it's like. And I also had a map or idea of what medical school was going to be like. And I didn't think I was going to be up to it. I didn't think I would like it. But I decided to go based on his recommendation. And I went, and it was completely different than what I thought it was going to be. It was easier than I thought it was going to be. I actually had more aptitude to do well than I thought I had. And I actually ended up falling in love with medicine, to my surprise. and ended up having a 50-year career as a medical doctor, which I would have never, predicted that would have happened if I hadn't had that conversation that one day. So
Yeah.
he busted the map that I had about medicine and medical
Yeah.
school in 20 minutes, and it changed my whole life.
Yeah. You just realize that, dude, what are you holding? That's not the map. Like, dude, that's
That
not
was
that's
my
not
map.
what.
My map was there's no reason to go to medical school if you don't want to be a doctor. And he said that
Yeah.
isn't true.
Yeah.
He said, a lot of people go to medical school. They don't end up, big practicing doctors. They do other things with an MD. They get an MD degree. And I really didn't know that. I was very naive at the time.
Yeah, yeah. You so far now you've shared two instances, and I'd love for you to like share probably the third, and then I would ask follow-up questions.
Say that again. I didn't hear that.
I'd love if you could share a third story regarding the quote.
Let's take a quick pause. If you're enjoying this conversation and want more thought-provoking ideas straight to your inbox, join the Relatable Wisdom email list. It's free, quick, and filled with bite-sized insights, inspiring quotes, and behind-the-scenes reflections from our guests. Just head to relatablewisdom.com/join. That is relatablewisdom.com/join. Or tap the link in the show notes. And hey, subscribing to the podcast helps more than you think, and it's free. So if you haven't already, hit that follow button wherever you're listening. All right, let's get back to the conversation.
Another story?
Yeah.
So one of the things I do a lot now is I help people with anger. I help them, eliminate their anger problems. And what I found out was that our brains create our anger by giving us maps of what's happening. And those maps are often not what's really happening, but we don't see any of that because it's all happening in the background, invisibly. We maybe see people doing things we think are bad or wrong or they shouldn't be doing and stuff like that. But we don't see that our brain is giving us these ways of looking at it and telling us what's true about whatever's happening that may or may not be true. And based on what our brain sort of tells us is true, we get angry because our brain has said, this is how you should look at it. And this is what you should think about it. And this is what's true. A lot of times you come to find out what our brain told us was true that made us angry doesn't turn out to be really true. Sometimes we find that out, and sometimes we don't. So sometimes we can be angry for a long time over things that we're mistaken about. We've assumed somebody's motive or why somebody did something, something about their character or their motivation or the kind of person they are could be completely false, but we assumed it. And then based on our assumption, we've gotten angry. So our brain is constantly giving us maps of the territory and telling us this is what's true. And just like most maps are not 100% accurate, our brains are frequently giving us bad maps, which is stirring up not just anger, but other emotions that we have. So we have anxiety, our brain is giving us a set of maps, that's making us anxious. Same for guilt, same for sadness. Our brain is telling us to look at things in a certain way and that's what the truth is about it. And if you stop and start to ask some difficult questions, hopefully you'll find out that your brain may have misled you into having an emotion that there was really no real basis for other than the narratives that your brain gave you.
Yeah.
So that's one of the reasons why I chose that quote, because it's so relevant to the work that I'm doing now and I've been doing for many years in helping people overcome stress and overcome emotions, because really you have to understand how those things get created by our own brains.
Yeah. The follow-up question I want to ask you now is, you said the map is not the destiny. The map is not the
territory.
I mean, the map is not the terror.
Yeah.
The map is not the now. Oftentimes, a lot of people they've had the completely wrong map all their life, and there's been no one to come tell them that, oh, this is not the map.
Yeah.
Oh, this is different. So the question I want to ask now is, how do we over the years, because this code has been around with you, this realization has been around with you for a long time. Over the years, what would you say were the common ways that you can realize that the map was not the territory? I'll give an example. In one of the stories you shared, which was about med school, you the privilege of getting advice from someone who was
Yeah. It happens like that a lot. It's like, remember when there was a point where we believed in Santa Claus until one day somebody made fun of us for believing in Santa Claus, who maybe was a couple of years older than us.
Yeah.
And we realized, oh, wait a second, Now, when I think about it now, how did that guy get around to all the houses, and how did he get down all the chimneys and take all the presents to all the kids around the world?
Yeah.
Well, it doesn't really make a lot of sense. But until somebody really, shakes your, belief in what you believe is true, it doesn't happen. So usually you'll run into, things happen for me. Like when in college, there were certain lectures that I was in where it just blew my mind. I was introduced to something that I hadn't been exposed to before, and it shattered one of those maps that I had, like in physics or in chemistry or something like that. There are a couple examples where things that I thought were scientifically true turned out not to be true. And then we've seen that in medicine also. In medicine, every couple of years, things change, understandings change. And what we were told was scientifically fact 5 years later, so now they figured out something else and a new thing got revealed. And now that's what we believed 5 years ago, we no longer believe about health and medicine now. So it's constantly changing. Things are being uprooted. Our maps are always being replaced with newer maps. And then those maps look really good in the beginning. And then 5 years later, there are holes in those maps and newer ones are coming along. Things are, if you look what's happening in AI today, I mean, every new AI stuff coming out every moment, that's changing and evolving that whole field. Everything keeps changing there. So usually you have to have some fortunate encounter with a mentor or somebody who's wiser than you through a class, or you read a book, or you go to a lecture, or you watch a YouTube video or a TED Talk video or a podcast or something like that, where somebody opens your mind to a new perspective that people around you so far hadn't exposed you to. And then you can pursue that and see if it holds water or not. That's usually how it works. And sometimes you can intentionally put yourself in situations where you're going to have your beliefs challenged, by people who are really smart, and accomplish big things. If I take somebody who's really famous or really accomplished, somebody's run a big company and doing something really outstanding, you apprentice with that person, you're going to learn some stuff. You're going to have some of your maps revised, and they're going to teach you some wisdom that you didn't have before. And that wisdom, the name of your podcast, and that wisdom is going to come in and it's going to replace the old quote wisdom that you had.
Yeah.
That's now, turns out was not so accurate, but now you've got better understandings and newer understandings, and then they're going to get replaced, sometime down the road. And it's just going to keep going like that. So the more you can put yourself in situations where smart people, experienced people who've accomplished a lot can challenge you, then you will get your maps revised more quickly when you do it that way.
Cool.
You hang around somebody, you go to somebody like Tony Robbins and you go to his programs or watch which I haven't done a lot of, but he's the kind of a guy that will break up your maps very, very strongly. He'll show you that what you believe isn't really true a lot of the times. And he does it very well. He's made a great reputation for himself over the years. And people will put themselves in that environment. They'll go to those programs for the whole, knowing that it's going to shake up their worldview a little bit and hopefully make them better off for it.
Yeah. Thank you so much for sharing that, because it's not exactly wise to rely on, say, hoping to get a fortunate account just to have your map shaken, because not everybody is fortunate enough to have fortunate encounter. So
that's right.
Knowing that we can increase the possibilities of having our map shaken is something that gives me great.
Yes, you can engineer that, or at least the probability. You can put yourself in situations where it's got a higher probability of happening by you choosing. Okay, I'm gonna hang around this person, or I'm gonna read this person's books, or I'm gonna watch this person's videos, and I'm gonna use it to expand my understanding of the different things.
Yeah, thank you so much, Doctor. Before we go, what's one final takeaway or advice you have for my listeners?
I would say if you're particularly around anger, if you're having anger problems and you've tried all kinds of stuff, which most people have, and it hasn't worked, which is true for most people, it's not you. The problem is not you. The problem is that you haven't been exposed to the right information yet that could help you really understand how your brain creates the anger. And then once you understand that invisible process that you can't really see, but you can learn about it, that'll give you all kinds of new possibilities and new opportunities to step in and take control of your anger, instead of your anger having control of you most of the time, which is the way it is for most people today. I mean, if you If you turn on the television or you scroll social media today, you see lots of people who are just totally controlled by their anger and don't have the ability to control it when it rears its ugly head. And you can do that. So it's a myth to believe that you don't have that control. You just have to have the right understandings. And again, you have to have a better map of where the anger is coming from, the one that we currently have. The map that we currently have is the anger's coming from all the behavior outside of us, the things that people are doing, groups are doing, government's doing, all that kind of stuff. And those are just the triggers. The real action is what the anger is being created by our brains inside us. And you need a map that shows you what that process is like. And then once you have that, then you can say, okay, now I know why I'm getting angry. Now I can step in and see what I can do about that. And it gives you a lot more power and control. So don't believe the myth that you don't have a lot of power and control over your emotions, and particularly your anger, because I found over the last 40 years that people have enormous power and control once they have the right map for understanding what's going on.
Yeah. Thank you so much, Dr. Mort, for coming on the podcast and for sharing your
Sure.
I found it particularly inspiring. I know my listeners will. Thank you so much. Where can people learn more, connect with you, check your stuff?
Yeah, you can visit my website. It's docorman.com, DOCORMAN.com. And I have a handout on anger, a PDF handout that's free that people can get by going to theangersolution.org, theangersolution.org. And that'll get them some information about me and about anger, and they can be connected to me through that.
Yeah, once again, thank you for coming to the podcast.
Thanks for listening to Relatable Wisdom. If you found something meaningful from this episode, make sure to follow and subscribe wherever you're listening. If you'd like to support the show, you can do that by buying me a coffee. The link is in the show notes. Every little bit keeps the conversations going. I'm your host, Wisdom Contour, and I will see you in the next one. Until then, stay curious, stay inspired, and keep growing.